patience as we looked up the technical details. So, first of all, I want to thank the Semnani Family Foundation for supporting this symposium, as well as several other events at the Jordan Center. So thank you. This makes this all possible. So, this conference today brings together scholars from diverse disciplinary backgrounds to explore the religious, administrative, architectural, and demographic dynamics of the great conurbation that grew and expanded on the Tigris. This is the heart of Iran Shar, the Delhi Iran Shar, the heart of the empire of the Iranians, as it was known in late antiquity. So in order to set the scene, I will provide here an overview of the development of Seleucia-Ctesiphon to provide a broad historical and urban framework to situate the papers and contextualize the different urbanistic characteristics that govern each of these cities. Reflected in its later Arabic name, Al-Madain, the region actually comprised a number of cities, which grew, declined, and shifted in importance over the centuries as the Tigris changed course and new kings sought to put their marks in the region. With ruins over twice the size of ancient Rome, the region around the old imperial cities of Seleucia and Ctesiphon grew into the Sasanian Empire's largest and most important urban area. Unlike ancient Rome, its monumental zones consisted not just urban monuments, but game parks, and even smaller cities that extended far into the countryside. Even in the early Islamic period, the region retained an impressive collection of ancient monuments in various states of ruin, as well as half-remembered ruined cities. The region changed in importance for the different empires that controlled it. Of course, these cities did not serve as capitals in the modern sense of the term. That is why in most of my works I prefer to call them royal residence cities or administrative centers. Nevertheless, it is undeniable that for the Seleucid, Parthian, and Sasanian empires, at one time or another, this region hosted the most populous and administratively central, as well as monumentally important city of the empire, or cities. This area consisted of four major regions. Seleucia on the Tigris, the first of the cities founded by Seleucus Nicator, one of Alexander the Great's rivals and the greatest of his successors. Ctesiphon, founded by the Parthians and site of one of their royal residences. And Ve Ardashir, founded by the first Sasanian king, Ardashir I, after his conquest of the Parthian Empire. It was joined to Ctesiphon by a pontoon bridge, and the two of them took on an aspect of a double fortress. Ve Ardashir was the site of the main cathedral of the Church of the East, and was the center of Persian Judaism. Sometime in the 5th century, in the reign of Touraj, the Tigris changed course, bisecting Ve Ardashir and flooding much of it. Hastened by the flooding, the new city of Asbanbar, or New Ctesiphon, grew on the east bank of the Tigris. This was the urban context of the Taki Kisra, which was the centerpiece of a new late Sasanian monumental zone. So to provide a broader historical context, after the years of bloody battle that won it, the Seleucids forged their empire through a more methodical process of city foundation. The Seleucid campaign of city foundation reshaped and reoriented the former Achaemenid Empire. And newly founded primate cities, like Seleucia on the Tigris, drastically sidelined and eclipsed the Achaemenid topography of power, reducing or ignoring the main residence cities in the Persian core of the empire. And this yielded a new topography of power oriented in the north and towards the east. As in the Parthian and Sasanian periods, the cities tied together trade from the Persian Gulf, movement up and down Mesopotamia, the river traffic, and connected these to overland routes from the Iranian plateau to the Mediterranean. The start of intensive urbanization in the region began with Seleucus' decision to found a brand new city on the Tigris. The foundation permanently shifted Mesopotamia's preeminent city from the Euphrates and started the growth of a new post-Achaemenid tradition of Iranian urbanism in this region that it would extend through the coming of Islam. With this integration of Western Asian and Hellenic traditions, it provided a template for the Tetrapolis on the Mediterranean and important satrapal capitals like Ai-Khanum in Bactria, present-day Afghanistan. Seleucia grew to be the most important and populous city of the early empire, with the population rivaling any other city and surpassing any other city in the Hellenistic world, including Alexandria. Designing the city, Seleucus drew from the urban traditions of Babylon, his own original power base, as well as possibly his memory of Ptolemy's Alexandria, which he experienced as a guest while in exile. Seleucia, like Babylon, was shaped like a long rectangle, and like Alexandria, the city was laid on a grid with wide central east-west streets running through the center. North-south streets divided the urban space into rectangular blocks, measuring 144.7 by 72.35 meters, the largest known in the Hellenistic world, with the exception of now with new excavations or surveys in Spasun and Charax. So we know that this is a building that was probably built deliberately to surpass this. Although we have only a rough idea of its character, all streams of evidence overwhelmingly indicate that the city's architectural innovations, urban planning, and palatial features integrated Western Asian and Greek urban artistic and architectural ideas. This deliberate mixture of a variety of Mediterranean and Western Asian urban and architectural traditions emerges as a hallmark of Seleucid official architecture and is reflected in palace design temples that we see from Syria to Bactria. While modern terms like capital do not fit, this city was indeed the most important city of the empire and a showcase of monumental architecture that dwarfs all others in the Hellenistic world, including the enormous theater, the theater temple complex, I should say, which was at the center of the Agora, and reflecting the city's financial and bureaucratic preeminence, the enormous archive structure here, which was, again, the largest of their empire. While the city-blocked Agora archives and theater of Seleucia was the largest in the empire, the city itself cohered to a new imperial pattern that was replicated in scores of other foundations from Bactria to the Aegean. In fact, the pattern is such that we can think of it as a sort of imperial toolkit that was put into action numerous times over by several Seleucid agents who acted as city founders, but this was the one to which they all referred. Now, to provide some sort of context and contrast, Seleucia, as well as the other Seleucid cities, differed markedly from new Achaemenid foundations. The Persians preferred urban strategies of diffuse urbanization, as we see at Persepolis, where we have a central palatial citadel with an area of relatively dense settlement below on the plain, which is still coming to light today. But numerous sites spread throughout the Marv-Dash plain, including monumental and ceremonial ones, like the royal necropolis at Nakshi-Rostam, and, as attested in archival sources, villages in the surrounding countrysides and hills. The royal estate of Pasargadae illustrates the same pattern on a smaller scale, as does the newly laid out settlement at Dahan-Goleimon as a regional foundation. And this is in contrast to Mesopotamia, where the Achaemenids utilized Babylonia. Once the Arsacids took Seleucia on the Tigris around 141 BCE, the empire's administrative center of gravity shifted towards Mesopotamia, and the city grew in ritual importance as the site of a major royal residence. While the Roman sources continue to refer to several other settlements as royal residences or capitals, they mention Seleucia-Ctesiphon most often, indicating its growing dominance and soon its centrality to the Arsacid Empire. Exactly when Seleucia-Ctesiphon played this role is unknown, though the Arsacids first began to put their imprint on the area when they established a fort across from Seleucia where they billeted their troops. And this grew into a major metropolis in its own right, and connected to larger regional dynamics by smaller trading cities in the area. Seleucia on the Tigris itself remained Mesopotamia's most important and populous urban center, and its character and institutions changed only gradually after the Arsacid conquest. It retained the mint, which we'll hear about today, which produced both royal and civic coinage. Its theater was maintained into the early 2nd century CE, although a fire destroyed the stelae and archives that lay in front of it sometime before 129 BCE. With these official buildings gone, private dwellings and artisans' workshops soon grew over that vast Seleucid agora space. Despite this, the sacred area to the west of the theater continued in use and was elaborated several times. We see a similar sort of shift in cities, Seleucid cities in the Parthian period elsewhere, including at Dura-Europos. Across the river, approximately 4.5 kilometers from Seleucia, Parthian Ctesiphon expanded and grew, and soon hosted a royal palace, which we'll hear about today as well. Roman sources, such as Pliny's, mention of, quote, a wooded district containing not only palm groves, but also olives and orchards, end quote, near Ctesiphon, suggests that the city was a truly royal city, complete with paradise estates cultivated by Arsacid kings. And this is the area, Ctesiphon, is the area that has been the least explored out of all of these, and is the one about which we know the least. Ve Ardashir, founded by the first Sasanian king, Ardashir I, was intended to express his new urbanistic ideas. And the shape of the city, as far as we can tell, reflected ideas that he developed first in his sort of urban laboratory, imperial laboratory at Ardashir Khwara, Firuzabad, which was the first Sasanian king of kings' first royal residence that he founded in Pars. Ve Ardashir, located here, as far as we know, shares aspects of its urban character, though we don't know if it was as geometrically perfect as was Ardashir Khwara, which you see on the right from this aerial photograph. Unlike Ardashir Khwara, Ve Ardashir was designed to interact with and dominate the previous cities versus the countryside. And I mentioned before, it was connected to Ctesiphon by a pontoon bridge. And the Roman sources that comment on Julian's failed invasion all make a point of mentioning what a daunting double fortress this was. Soon after the shift in the Tigris, the city of Ve Ardashir declined. This was the urban context of the Jewish centers of the empire, as well as some of the major sites of administration. However, as the city declined, a new city grew up, Asbanbar, or New Ctesiphon, on the east bank of the Tigris. And this was the urban context of the great palace of Taki Kisra, which was the centerpiece of a new late Sasanian monumental zone. While the Iranian plateau contained sites that were sacred to the memory of the dynasty and their identity as kings of kings, this region to the southeast of Ctesiphon was the showcase for the late Sasanian kings' wealth, power, and lineage. Asbanbar expanded exponentially during and after the reign of Hasra I, although earlier kings appear to have already invested in the region, at least since Shapur II, if not earlier. Contrasting with Ve Ardashir and Ctesiphon, Asbanbar was an unwalled, sprawling array of residential areas and suburban estates, centered on the King of Kings' palatial complex, which was bounded on its western flank by the Tigris. In this region, near the royal palace and treasuries, the late Sasanian kings maintained gardens, game parks, polo grounds, and other monuments. The cities hosted multiple palaces in the Sasanian period, and it's important to differentiate between them. Ctesiphon's most important urban feature, mentioned by both late antique and Islamic sources, was the fortified White Palace. Often confused with the Taki Kisra, this palace was the primary residence of the Sasanian king of kings when they resided in Ctesiphon. This was a sort of fortress palace, more akin to, by comparison, the great palace of Constantinople, the Vatican, and the Kremlin, to name a few examples from the late antique and medieval world, which participated in this same tradition. Already in existence under Shapur II, the White Palace was maintained until the end of the empire, and even into the early Islamic period. Nothing of it really remains to the extent that we have of Taki Kisra. And we do not know, it's still kind of conjectural where it was located, but it was apparently close enough to the Tigris that Shapur II could be awakened in his bedchamber in the palace by the clamor of crowds. The Sasanian kings used Ctesiphon's White Palace through the end of the empire, and it was described as fortified and easily defensible. This contrasts with the great Taki Kisra, whose open form was intended to overawe, display, and envelop rather than conceal and defend. This, along with the scattered references in the literary sources, suggests it is very likely that Taki Kisra was favored for public audiences, banquets, and the reception of foreign envoys, while the White Palace remained the true residence of the King of Kings and his family. To put this in a cross-cultural perspective, the late Roman Empire also built two great complexes, though they distribute these locations differently. The fortified palace of Constantinople was the residence of the emperor and palace, the place of banqueting and reception. But it was the great church of Hagia Sophia that served a similar purpose as a gargantuanly enormous and expensive prestige structure entirely dedicated to ritual. With respect to Ctesiphon, it's perhaps illuminating that Saad, the Muslim commander of the conquest, used both palaces after taking the cities, but for different purposes. He resided in the fortified White Palace, but used the Tak, the Kisra, as a mosque. So at this point, I'm going to conclude my introduction, and we're going to shift to the papers. But first, I just want to thank the speakers for journeying to Irvine on this blustery April morning. And I'm looking forward to hearing your papers and learning more about this incredibly fascinating region. So thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ali Musawi. I'm chairing the first panel of this one-day conference. Our first speaker is Dr. Daryaee, a native of Shiraz, city of saints and poets. She completed her undergraduate studies in Tehran in archaeology of pre-Islamic Iran. Her MA dissertation was about iconography of early Kushan and Great Kushan under the supervision of the late Dr. Masoud Azanush, the former director of the Iranian Center for Archaeological Research. She participated in a number of fieldworks in Iran and Uzbekistan, where she studied the coinage of the Kushans and other Indo-Iranian dynasties. She also worked for a while as a project coordinator and research associate at Research Institute of Cultural Heritage and Tourism Organization of Iran for one of those World Heritage projects, the nomination file of the Silk Rivers. In 2011, she went to Austria in order to pursue her doctoral studies and obtained her doctorate with a dissertation entitled Early Kushan Coinage in the Context of Exchanges and Contacts Across Indo-Iranian Borderlands in English. under the supervision of Dr. Michael Aram and Dr. Nicholas Schindler. Dr. Tassab is currently an associate professional specialist for Central Asian numismatic at Princeton University, where she studied, cataloged, and curated a number of Sasanian coin collections in the Department of Rare Books and Special Collections at Princeton, and now she's involved in a project with Parthian coins, I think, Parthian coin collections, of which 1,000 of them has been cataloged and made accessible through the Princeton Online Coin Database. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Tassab.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sadi, for the nice introduction, and thank you, Touraj, for Thank you, Touraj, for inviting me, and Matthew, thank you for organizing this amazing conference so much, and all your amazing colleagues who give us this chance to get together and talk about Ctesiphon as one of the main historical cities which provided so many research potential for us. So thanks to Ctesiphon. Today I'm going to give you a talk about the Parthian coin production in Ctesiphon. So I try to avoid give a complication of numismatic principles in my talk, so I don't want to get you bored. So I'll give you an overview of the coin production, the development of the coining system in Mesopotamia, particularly Ctesiphon, and the extent of this need, the specific needs, and the way that the coin was spreading all area. Mesopotamia was always a center of formation of several historical governments. Seleucia, which is also called as Seleucia and Tigris, due to its it is supposed to change my does not want to cooperate today. Okay. Oh, okay. Let's just take. Okay.
Strange. I know. PCs.
Okay, Seleucia, which is also called as Seleucia and Tigris due to its location on west bank of Tigris, was a key center within the Hellenized Orient. Seleucia as a Greek metropolis, which at the heart of the Mesopotamia, present a complex dynamic of encounter and exchanges between the Greek, Seleucid culture and ancient Oriental traditions. Seleucia and later on Ctesiphon had an important geopolitical feature that could enable many historical powers to monitor their military operations against their Western counterparts. Besides its military significance, these cities became as an important cultural and political center for the two long-lasting Iranian empires, namely Parthian and Sasanian. The opposite side of Seleucia, on the east bank of Tigris, is the city of Ctesiphon, which was later on called the Ardashir, as was rightly mentioned by Matthew, by the Sasanian, and also Dere Iran Shah, or part of Iran. Seleucia was conquered by the Arsacids under Mithridates I in 141 BC. He immediately struck silver coins in Seleucia. Beside his other additional silver and bronze coins he was issuing in the Iranian plateau. The royal image of Mithridates I issued in Seleucia is similar to those of Seleucid satrap Androgoras coin time. Interestingly enough, Mithridates I also minted another coin type in another denomination, which was copper, in mint ekbatana, which is modern Hamedan, and is also similar to Androgoras coin type, where he portrayed as the same bearded boss, monogram behind his head and neck is driving the figure to write the 2 lines inscription Basileus Arsaco. Arsacid political power during the Mithridates I was transforming from a kingship system to a unified empire. This development can be seen in transformation of Mithridates' coin's title from Arsaces to King Arsaces or Great King Arsaces, and adding the title Philhellen on his coin minted in Seleucia. On the Iranian plateau, Ekbatana or Hamadan was taken by Mithridates from Seleucid in 148 BC and became the main summertime residence of the royal family and the court meat production for the entire Arsacid Empire. Dates appear for the first time on the tetradrachm of Mithridates I in Seleucia and Greek letters, corresponds with numeral values based on the Seleucid era. With the expansion of Arsacid power, the seat of central government shifted from Nisa in Turkmenistan to Seleucia during the Mithridates II, a city which was basically the royal city of the Seleucid dynasty and used for commerce and minting. Seleucia was evidently among those cities that retained some form of Hellenistic city status under Arsacid control. The Arsacid largely adopted the arts, architecture, religious belief, and royal insignia of their culturally heterogeneous empire, which encompassed Persian, Hellenistic, and regional cultures. Though it eventually saw a gradual revival of Iranian tradition. In this regard, the coinage of Mithridates II, issued in Seleucia, is a very good example to reflect the first process of expansion to consolidation of an empire and highlights the internal Iranian influences on Arsacid coin design rather than presenting purely Hellenistic iconographical model. The royal portrait presents a significant interest in uniquely Arsacid style. According to the upcoming volume of SMP 7, which is done by my colleague Seleucia Bosch in British Museum, 11 Tyra variations have been identified for Mithridates II, which all reflect the iconographic development of royal ideology to emphasize and consolidate his claim over the Arsacid Empire. So I didn't have these 11 coin types to show you, so I just collected the sample that you have in Princeton to show you the variation of the headdress of Mithridates II. His tetradrachm minted in Seleucia and Tigris show a clear transformation from the established Hellenistic imagery, which was Beiti Aisha, to portraying a seated archer wearing Arsacid suit and holds an arch in hand, which is the typical Parthian arch. Mithridates II and the other Arsacid rulers after him were inscribed their political title on their coins as King of Kings to receive the ego of the royal Achaemenid and demonstrating a growing Iranian ideology. Indeed, the Arsacid court, like their predecessors, accepted many local kings as vassals and appointed a few autonomous satraps, largely outside Iran, but these satraps were obviously not as strong as those of Achaemenid. Another indication of Iranian practice on the coinage can be seen in Artabanus I's coin, where the date conventionally appeared to be calculated according to the Arsacid era, which was 247 BC, but still is controversial. When Arsacid captured Seleucia and Tigris, several other cities also served as capitals. However, according to the historical sources like those of Pliny, Ammianus Marcellinus, the Arsacid built fortress of Ctesiphon and established the seat of central government immediately opposite side of Seleucia and the Tigris, possibly for accommodating troops. Despite the political expansion and relocating the central power and official capital to Seleucia, We do not know if the city of Ctesiphon was merged with Seleucia at this time or not. It doesn't seem that the city of Ctesiphon has become the official capital until the reign of Touraj I, when Ctesiphon reached a peak as a political and commercial center and became the main trade center for luxury through the Silk Road. This new city of Ctesiphon was long perceived to be located at Seleucia. Though the region has not yet been systematically excavated, was shown by the Italian excavator to be fresh construction separate from Seleucia. Therefore, the actual place of Arsaci's Ctesiphon has been tentatively recognizing on the east bank of Tigris, opposite of Seleucia, 9 kilometers north of Irvine Castro. Nevertheless, according to Brosius, Ctesiphon became the site of royal coronation ceremony and the representational city of the Arsacid, and was the winter residential place for the Arsacid kings. Now I would like to give you a brief introduction about the relationship between Seleucia and Ctesiphon, and when means Ctesiphon became as an operative one. Although we are not able to draw a distinctive between Seleucia and Ctesiphon, it seems likely that these two cities were acting like a cosmopolitan metropolis. Ctesiphon during the Arsacid period was a well-established city, mainly a trade center rather than a place for minting the royal coins. A comprehensive work published by MacDowell in 1935, a book called Coins from Seleucia and the Tigris, catalogued and documented 2,600 Arsacid coins from the single mint in Seleucia, in which there was no single indication of Arsacid coin found in Ctesiphon. Therefore, it can be suggested that after the occupation by the Sasanian, the royal capital and the central mint was shifted to Ctesiphon. Indeed, we do not have any evidence to show that Ctesiphon ever possessed a political entity distinct from that of Seleucia. We know that during the Hellenistic period, Ctesiphon was a safe base for caravans who were coming from Iran and other regions who transferred their goods to the other side of the Tigris. It seems less likely that during the Arsacid period any immediate changes took place in the position of Ctesiphon, except considering it as a garrison center for quartering the troops, as also stated by Strabo. However, it cannot be true that the court was spending the winter time in Ctesiphon before Orodes II. It was only during Orodes II that Ctesiphon became an official capital. Therefore, one may ask why Seleucia, which was a well-established city, was not acting as a military garrison. Why Arsacid considered another city like Ctesiphon for their military purpose? From topographical point of view, the east of Tigris was much more convenient for the mounted troops who were coming from the very east of empire to the court, rather than passing by canals and rivers to reach Seleucia. Orodes II and the following Arsacid kings realized the significance of Ctesiphon as a geopolitical region to protect the western portion of the empire. It seems likely that Ctesiphon was well suited and it provided more spaces for all level needs of the royal court than Seleucia. As it has been mentioned before, both Seleucia and Ctesiphon were considered as one unique metropolis that probably the newer part received more political attention than the oldest one. Again, as we said, we do not have enough evidence to prove that by establishing the royal court in Ctesiphon, the eastern part of Tigris played as a separate political entity from Seleucia. This can be seen by a group of 129 coins found in Seleucia. I'm sorry, the quality of coins are not really good, but this is the only sample that I could find. So this coin shows that we call them so-called autonomous coin, belong to Phraates IV, which probably shows formal union took place between Seleucia and Ctesiphon. The obverse type represent Taisha facing to right with threaded headdress, while the reverse type of this series represent two city goddess both hold cornucopia in their left hands and probably were clasping hands over an altar. The unification of both cities as one major metropolis can be apparent in the fact that we do not have any indication of transfer of the needs from Seleucia to Ctesiphon, probably until the Sasanian. This is quite evident that the certain administrative centers, like the royal meet, was kept in the older part of the metropolis, which now is called Seleucia-Ctesiphon, despite the establishment of a new political and royal palace, and more importantly, the military headquarters in Ctesiphon. During the Arsacid period, Hamadan and the Iranian plateau and Seleucia in Mesopotamia were two main capitals of empire and two main production centers for the coinage. It seems logical that these two means were located in the regions that were important for the empire administrative and political organization, or that had a particular significance for its dynastic propaganda. Seleucia, as a well-established mint, was mainly specifying for minting the tetradrachs during the entire Arsacid period. When Arsacid captured Mesopotamia, Seleucia was already a great and successful commercial center. This can be clearly seen in the series of bronze coinage which the Arsacid Empire authorized to be struck in Seleucia. Seleucia had a special minting privilege in the Arsacid period. All these copper coinage were operating along with imperial issue to fulfill the needs of the royal currency. Most of these coins illustrate civic design with inscriptions. It has been said that in some cases we can tell from the monogram that the officials were responsible to supervise the royal tetradrach minting. The common style of this issue is portraying the goddess of Taisha of Seleucia, either on uppers or on readers. This privilege was not granted to the other Arsacid mints, although there are certain groups which can be assigned to Susa or Ecbatana. The high majority of coin finds were also bronze, autonomous, and royal coins, which were intended to circulate. There is a fact that the coins are mobilizing beyond the boundaries of the Susa. Beyond the boundaries of the area which were basically intended to use. However, the significant point in the Arsacid coin production is difference between the area used their silver or bronze. The bronze coins were extensively used for the local transition, whereas the silver was used for interregional use or trade. We should bear in mind that the bronze currency played a more significant role as a medium of exchange rather than the silver coinage. The bronze currency in antiquity provided a great deal of purchasing power among all levels of society. Therefore, it reserved a high proportion of the total currency of that period. In antiquity, issuing the bronze currency was supposed to meet several requirements. For example, necessity of having an additional currency which could be replaced by the former denomination, which could be tetradrach or drachs, in circulation. For example, changing the political power or deficiency in the economy. In this situation, we may have a new denomination like bronze. Another reason could be associated with the high demand of society for purchasing or increasing the amount of commercial transaction, specifically owing to increase in population rather than a small community like those of merchants. In the same way, it should be noted that there are communities which place along the border between two means areas and enjoy the privilege of commercial relationships with both centers. In such context, the medium of circulation was mixed and the amount of the usage was basically dependent on the vicinity of each community to the main cities. It is important to note that in the Iranian plateau, the random finds of tetradrachs from areas where served by the other Arsacid city-mates is also recorded. So we can admit that the silver denomination was drawn beyond the initial area of their circulation under specific circumstances. Dura Europus itself struck no coins, and its normal currency was the product of the other mint in the region. Dura drew the money from two main places, Antioch or Seleucia. Both Arsacid drach and tetradrachs have been found, along with a number of autonomous coins and 190 specimens of the royal bronze from Seleucia. In the same way, a large number of autonomous bronze coins of Seleucia mint have been found in Susa, in Elymais, as well as 23 of them found in excavation of Babylonia. 5 royal coins from Nippur during the 2nd century AD, together with a specimen of autonomous coin in Uruk and Tel Asmar to the northeast of Seleucia, also holds the autonomous coins, all together with the royal bronze coins of Susa belong to Papyrus II and tetradrachs of Vologases IV. According to MacDowell, these coins bore the ethnic form of the name of Seleucia. I haven't identified among these coins, but he mentioned that. The other mints during the Arsacid period also struck royal bronze series for local circulation. Excavation of Susa revealed an interesting fact, which is the civic coins minted in Seleucia were also frequently over there. It seems likely that at the same time the bronze coins of Seleucia from Seleucid and Arsacid period were the common part of the local currency. Susa at that time was possessed a stable monetary workshop which regularly issued silver and bronze coins, and it was intended to meet the cash needs of the city and the region. However, this is contradicting with the presence of massive bronze autonomous coins from Seleucia in the region, specifically in Elymais. One may ask the question that was the Seleucia workshop supplementing or providing the currency for the local needs of Susa? Does this mean that Susa was not able to meet enough local coins, though it was an active place by itself even during the Seleucid period? This sounds implausible. Existence of bronze coins of Seleucia in Susa and northern Mesopotamia demonstrate a strong commercial traffic between Seleucia-Ctesiphon to Susa and eventually to Ecbatana. Although we are far behind to complete the evidence of Arsacid coin distribution, the outline of the Seleucia mint can be relatively drawn. It contains all Babylonia, probably southern Mesopotamia. It has been suggested that in the region bordering on this area, the coinage minted in Seleucia compared with that of the other mints. In the north, with that of Antioch, and with the one or more mints in Iran, and to the east with mint of Ecbatana. So we have one belt, the user of tetradrach extended from Syria down to Euphrates to Babylonia, and then across to southern Iran. Another is issuer of drachs, stretching west from solid block of central and northern Iran into northern Mesopotamia as far as west of Euphrates. To sum up, the extension of Arsacid coin find minted in Seleucia-Ctesiphon in other mint places like Susa does not imply the difficulty of Susa as such to fulfill its local needs. Instead, it does suggest a close trade and social interactions between several states in the empire, or in other words, between the metropolis of Seleucia-Ctesiphon and another upper satrapies. The Arsacid Empire was not a centralized political unit. Instead, it was an empire with various range of cultural attitudes, languages, and several economic systems. The essential core and capital of the country, which was Seleucia-Ctesiphon, was captured by Romans for 3 times. But the empire was still survived because the political center was propagated among other centers too. The city-states like those of Elamite, Persis, Khorasan, who were also minting coins, had a vital role in keeping the economic stability of the empire. Although the essential components of the empire, which were these small kingdoms and local elites who were independent, and they were also have this chance to have their own army, still had to pay tribute to central government, which was the main source of the royal income. While the main political power had to respect their privilege, they were all controlled king of the king. King of the king, and the political regulations and principles ruled in a way that allows the entire political system works perfectly for about 470 years. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tasso. I think we're going to leave the questions for later, after the two speakers are done. I have questions myself,
Sure.
so
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Our second speaker is Dr. Stefan Hauser, whom I know for a number of years now, and who is a professor of archaeology of ancient Mediterranean cultures and their relations to the ancient Near East and Egypt at the University of Constance in Germany, a beautiful medieval city. He has a long resume. I'm going to skip a number of periods during his professional life. Stefan Hauser completed his MA in Classical Archaeology and obtained her doctorate in Near Eastern Archaeology in Berlin in 1994. After taking up a number of temporary positions, he moved and took the chair at Constance. His projects and research interests are varied, as you can see by looking at his impressive list of publications and books. I'm going to mention some of them. I didn't know that he was a Byzantinist as well, and he wrote a book on the lottery products in the early Byzantine period, and his second dissertation, or habilitation, completed in 2012, on the mortuary practices and burials in the Neo-Assyrian period. Also the editor of a number of books, one on the visibility of nomads in archaeological record, and also a very interesting volume, an assessment and development of Near Eastern studies, a conference and a book that he organized with Anne Gunter, in which I had the privilege to participate in 2001. In 2017, he organized an exhibition on the site of Palmyra, rebuilt Palmyra, with the aim of capturing the public attention to the dangerous situation of cultural heritage under threat. Since 2016, Dr. Hauser is the co-director of a British-German or Anglo-German archaeological research project, I would say excavation research project, at the site of Charax-Spasina in southern Iraq and its hinterland. I'm allowed to mention his future project in Iran in the region of Bospar, a very interesting, promising research fieldwork that I hope he will carry out in this coming year. Professor Hauser is one of the leading authorities on the art and archaeology of the Parthian Empire, and he's going to treat us today with an expose on the work of the German archaeological teams at Ctesiphon. Professor Hauser, the podium is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. Thank you very much for this very, very kind invitation. And we had the privilege of you participating in our Healthcare conference. And thank you so much to Matthew and Touraj for the wonderful invitation to the seminar and the Semnani Foundation for making such an event possible. The Alsacid and Sasanian capital Ctesiphon is such an important topic, far too little investigated and especially undervalued or even disregarded by mainstream Western Romano-centric research, that conferences like this are really important to remind everybody on the importance of the region of Al-Madain, which, as Matthew already mentioned, covers about twice the space of ancient Rome, and this already shows that this region of Ctesiphon was not only politically equivalent to Rome or later Constantinople in the east, but also in terms of being one of the centers of the ancient world. So much the more it surprises and disappoints at the same time that we know so little about this city, or all these cities, arguably, as I said, centers of the ancient world. In fact, we know even less about the royal palaces. We hardly know more about the Arsacid period palace than that it must have existed, since Ctesiphon was, as Strabo reports, used by the Arsacids as winter residence. And it developed from there into the sole capital of the empire. Cassius Dio simply mentions Ctesiphon as a place in Hekai Pasileia Echusi, where the royal palace was situated. And according to Tacitus, Ctesiphon was a place where the king of kings was crowned. We heard that already. And although we are not told where exactly the crowning took place, the palace might have been a likely place for this, especially as a few reports on such ceremonies don't mention larger crowds of attendees aside from a limited group of elites. We also learn that Trajan, when he conquered Ctesiphon in 116, took as booty the golden throne and the daughter of King Osroes there. From Herodian, we learn that in 198 the royal treasure was left behind in this basileia. But nothing is relayed in ancient sources on the architecture or the life at court. Thus, in the absence of standing remains or excavations, we don't know anything about the architecture, the furnishings or decorations of the palace, for sure. And in fact, we don't even know where the palace actually was and where we should look for it in the not completely impossible event that excavations in Iraq will become an option again in the future. Therefore, my talk could be over at this point already, and we would still get back on track for the program and continue with an extended coffee break. But if you don't mind, I will spend a couple of minutes. It's an overlength survey. The paper is too long, I'm sorry for that. So I will spend a couple of minutes trying to work around the limited evidence and attempt to address the just mentioned questions one after the other, but in reverse order and very brief. Where to look for the palace, how could it have looked like, and what kind of furnishings, decorations could we expect? Which raises the question of royal Arsacid art in a way, but I won't go into detail. I hope it works.
Just use your mouse.
Maybe there. Oh,
Use your
sorry.
mouse.
The mouse?
Click on the other side, on your right side.
Left one?
Yes.
That's the left one.
No, it's a
No.
left one, left click.
Okay, good. Thank you. I would have liked a pointer, actually. I didn't bring one of my own. Anyway, so, sorry, I have to go over some of the material already presented by Matthew, and some overlap was to be expected in a conference on that topic, and you will notice the differences to what has been said before, and we might discuss that later on in the discussion and the question and answer section. So from the founding of Seleucia on the Tigris around 300 BC until the Muslim conquest of Ctesiphon, the area nowadays known as Al-Madain was the administrative, economic and cultural center of the great Oriental empires of the Seleucid, Arsacid and Sasanian kings. The paramount importance of the area started with the foundation of Seleucia, as we heard, situated on the western bank of the Tigris. This foundation followed a general shift in the importance of settlement and irrigation in Babylonia, from the Euphrates towards the Tigris, a reorientation of settlement system following the Achaemenid conquest of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The foundation by Seleucus combined this general trend with imperial strategy. The site was perfectly situated on the Nile Malcha, the royal canal, which led water from the Euphrates to the Tigris, while at the same time the new capital was much closer to the Iranian highlands. And this is some illustration from sites mentioned in Isidorus of Charax, who also points out the Seleucid route from the Euphrates towards Seleucia, and then mentions the provinces of the Arsacid Empire, not in a way of a geographical dictionary, not as an itinerary. But the important point is that Seleucia is the end point for all the routes coming from the west, and from there you enter via the Zagros into the highlands of Iran. So, Seleucia was thus strategically well situated, and at the same time its foundation a royal statement, less against Babylon, as you will often find in literature, but for the new administrative structure of the empire. Maybe a little anachronistic and possibly somehow overestimating. Pliny, in about 70 CE, reports that Seleucia had 600,000 inhabitants. Now, briefly show you this satellite image of the city's extended ruins, which we have seen before, and we already know that Seleucia was extensively excavated by the University of Michigan in the 1930s, and again by the University of Torino between 1964 and 1999. This was already described by Matt. So, according to Pliny, after the dissolution of the Seleucid Empire and the conquest of its eastern parts by the Arsacids, especially Mithridates I, a new Arsacid capital was founded 3 Roman miles or 4.5 kilometers away across the river from the populous capital Seleucia, at the place called Ctesiphon. This still unexplained name is first attested for a locality on the left side of the northern Babylonian Tigris by Polybius for the year 221 BCE. Thus, some settlement will have existed, but obviously not on grand scale. Since Strabo related that Ctesiphon was chosen a winter residence in order to spare the previous capital Seleucia the stationing of the troops accompanying the king, you will often find reports in literature that Ctesiphon remained less important as a city in itself. But in fact, Arsacid Ctesiphon, later called Al-Attika by Arab sources, was probably continuously enlarged during the 1st century BCE already. It is Strabo himself who reports that Ctesiphon became a hugely populated city in its own right. According to him, one part became important as royal seat, while in the other parts, quote, it was adorned by the kings with all they needed, with merchandise and all necessary arts, which means it became a city of commerce and art. This will have resulted from population growth at the center of power, and partly in later years it might have been related to a shift in the riverbed of the Tigris in the mid-1st century CE, which caused Seleucia's slow demise, very slow. But much the more, since we know about the importance of Ctesiphon, we would like to know exactly where to look for the city within the larger ruin field complex of Al-Madain. But where it remains, it remains uncertain where we should exactly look for the remains. We are only told it was 3 miles from, from Seleucia, but from where? From the middle of Seleucia? Or from its northern corner? Or from its southern corner? So somewhere to the east of Seleucia. Thus, Arsacid Ctesiphon could be here, or there, or there. I mean, I think at the border here, somewhere, starting there. So the clue to locate it lies in the location of a third city, already mentioned, the Ardashir. We know that in 230, Seleucia became supplanted by the Ardashir, Bahrasir in Arabic, which according to all Muslim Hebrew and Western sources was on the western bank of the Tigris. Accordingly, several of later Western sources call the Ardashir by the name Seleucia, while Christian texts call the metropolite of the Eastern Church the bishop and metropolite of Seleucia-Ctesiphon instead of the Ardashir-Ctesiphon, which might have been more correct. This served for confusion in modern research. Earlier researchers, like Herzfeld, thought that the Ardashir must have been founded on top of Seleucia physically. And even after fieldwork had established that the ruin excavated by American scholars from Ann Arbor was A. Seleucia and B. had no post-Arsacid levels, even though there were Sasanian coins found there, just not published, confusion prevailed. The problem in identifying the various cities within the extended ruin complex was caused by the fact that the various, mostly Islamic authors, disagree on the names of the various ruins, and B, that the river changed its course several times. So help came in the later 1960s and early 1970s from the Italian excavations close to the walls of the so-called round city. And let's show part of these round walls in a satellite image which you have seen before on the maps. The area we are talking about here is situated here, and you can see other stretches of the wall over there, and it goes like this, and it's a perfect circle of with a diameter of 2,860 meters. And the Italian excavations close to the wall showed 10 levels of the Sasanian period and another burial level beneath that, interpreted by the Italians as being probably belonging to the Arsacid period, which is definitely not the case. The burials just belong to the lowest level of buildings and are therefore also very early Sasanian. So it's really the time of Ardashir and Shapur we are dealing with. So this is a completely new foundation on this spot. And on the other hand, here in that area, at the highest point, the latest pottery was found, which belongs to the 13th century, as already figured out by Hans Herzfeld and also by the Italian colleagues afterwards. So the archaeological evidence from this round city here complies entirely with what we know from written texts. A foundation by Ardashir and a minor village ending in the 13th century. So this makes clear that makes certain that we do have the round city of Ardashir in this place and not on top of Seleucia on the Tigris, which was basically in the ruins during the Sasanian period. The Italian research provided the evidence for the following reconstructions of the distribution of the various cities. Seleucia over here, then the Ardashir, which Golini, the head of the Italian mission, thought of being founded at the top of the ancient village of Koche, due to a misinterpretation of the passage in Ammianus Marcellinus. And then he located Ctesiphon over here. And Fier, 1 year later, in 1976, reconstructed the area very close to what Golini had suggested already. Still, a closer look at the image shows you quite clearly that this round city here isn't round at all, and Matt already addressed this question. Therefore, I have to say something about it. And this already is a drawing which bears little resemblance to the actual walls you can see in the field or on satellite images. This is much closer to it, but the fact is the walls here on the western side and on the eastern side of the Tigris don't fit together. This is neither a perfect circle, nor do the walls fit in their measurements. These walls over here are more than 10 meters wide, and these ones here 3 meters 50. And while here there are bastions every about 30 meters, 40 meters, we have bastions here every 20 meters, and they are on an entirely different scale. It's entirely different brickwork, and so these two parts of walls over here and there simply don't belong together. We have two different faces, at least two different, maybe even more. So what I did 10 years ago was looking at all the evidence available from satellite images and from reports from the German excavations in the 1920s and the Italian excavations, and reconstructed a perfect circle which would fit exactly to this stretch of the city where the modern Tigris runs. And we know that the Tigris changed its bed in the later 5th or probably rather in the early 7th century, 6th and 7th century, and moved towards the west, destroying part of this, in my opinion, previously perfectly circular city of Re-Ardashir. The reconstruction of Re-Ardashir as a circular city reopens also the discussion of the location of Ctesiphon and the Tigris in its various phases, and finally leads me back to my discussion about the location of the Assasid period palace. Sources from the 3rd to the 7th century completely agree that Re-Ardashir and Ctesiphon were twin cities, only divided by the Tigris, like Procopius or Gregor of Nassiysk. 4th century Roman authors address them jointly as the most noble Persian cities, plural. Tabari even calls them the two royal cities, which seems correct as one became the administrative center for Babylonia while the other remained the royal capital for the empire. Following the various accounts, the twin cities appeared to ancient authors and inhabitants rather like one. This is particularly manifest in the Talmud, where the boundaries of both cities combined are considered as a boundary for movement on Sabbath. The impression of their unity was intensified by their connection via a bridge, already mentioned. According to Ibn Hokal, it was made from bricks, while other sources describe it as a pontoon bridge. It was called the Mahosa Bridge in Talmudic source, and its length was given as more than 141 cubits. If correct, this points to an extremely narrow riverbed of a little bit more than 70 meters, which is very narrow, but still within the range of the possible. Now, with minor exceptions, Al-Attika, so the ancient Ctesiphon, the oldest and largest part of Sasanian, but also previous Assasid period Madain, was very close to Re-Ardashir. And here the White Palace of the Sasanian and earlier kings had to be situated. And also the bridge across the Tigris was situated between Re-Ardashir and Al-Attika. Since Tabari relates that Shapur was awakened in his royal palace of Ctesiphon, which is the White Palace, by the anguished clamor of the people on the bridge. And because of this, I would suggest to look for the palace in this area, not too far off from the narrowest point between the two cities. Second, how could the palace have looked like? As remarked upon at the beginning, we have no description of the palace itself. Cassius Dio simply mentions Ctesiphon as a place where the royal palace, destroyed in 161 by Avidius Cassius, was situated. Basically, the same applies to possible candidates in the provincial capitals. Not a single description of any Arsacid basileia survived. The most extensive reference, by Polybius, praises the palace at Ecbatana, a seat of the ancient kings of Media, but obviously still in use at least in the 2nd century BCE. For its circuit of nearly 7 states, it is more than 1.2 kilometers, and the costliness of its wooden structures completely covered by golden and silver plates. But in large-scale excavations in Ecbatana, only standardized houses of uncertain date were exposed on the ancient hill. The huge basileia, which according to Polybius was not on the ancient hill, appears to have escaped archaeological attention so far. This palatial complex, including its gardens, is probably buried underneath modern Hamadan. So no way to excavate that. Therefore, we have to turn to the only provincial capital where complex palace structures came to light, which is Nisa, capital of Parthia or Parthiani, situated at the foot of the Kopet Dagh near Ashgabat in Turkmenistan, and possibly the first capital of the Arsacid kingdom. Since Ostraka provided the name Mithradat Kert for Old Nisa, it is commonly assumed that the site is a foundation or refoundation of Mithridates first and served as state capital before his conquests of Media and Babylonia. Excavations uncovered 2 complexes of official buildings on the heavily fortified hill of Old Nisa, and I will just utter 2 sentences on this and then go in a little bit more detail over there. In the north, the Yuchaki, so the South Turkmenistan Archaeological Complex expedition, excavated a large building, the so-called square building, measuring 60 by 60 meters, 200 by 200 feet. A large central courtyard is surrounded on all 4 sides by a series of elongated rectangular rooms, which all repeat an analogous scheme with a deep bench along the walls and a roof supported by a central row of wooden columns. While the original purpose of this building was probably of assembly and banqueting, in the 1st century CE it was turned into a storehouse for precious furnishings, disused decorative objects like the famous ivory Rita, several Hellenistic statues and seals which have been recovered from the area. Nearly 3,000 ostraka, which have been found in the rooms outside the great building, attest to the administration of the royal wine cellars for the years 104 to 12 BCE. In the central part of Nisa, a group of monumental buildings was found around a large open area. The palatial complex consists of the Red Building, and you can see that here, the Tower Building, the Square Hall, and something which is deliberately called Palace. And in addition to this, there is this so-called round structure, round temple. You will find various names in the literature. Just, I don't want to go into detail. But to give you an idea of the size, the Red Building is a monumental square building of 144 by 138 feet, so 44 by 42 meters. 3 steps lead into a more than 10 meter deep and 20 meter wide portico supported by 4 wooden columns. The central room, a nearly square rectangle of 16 by 17 meters, displayed a probably flat roof with a lantern and or opening, and is supported by 4 wooden decorated columns on a massive basis of 1 meter 25 or 4 feet square. Another example, the Tower Building, again, opens to the central open court with a 26 by 7.5 meter wide portico, only supported by 2 brick columns nearly 10 meters apart. So I cut short here. All these buildings you can see in Nisa are highly representative in their scale and make with 20 feet thick walls, huge rooms, and wide column fronts opening to the central court, but placed on platforms, raised platforms. The excavators called the entire complex Phase 2 of the development, and this will the whole ensemble will have been the palace in its latest phase of use, maybe except for this round temple here. According to the excavators, this part here also formed already part of the palatial complex. And in an article which I was just informed this morning, which appeared today, I try to argue that this was a later addition to the whole temple complex, and part of the general transformation of the entire area here, when the Palace of Nisa came out of use, because it became superfluous as a palace, since the power shifted to the Mesopotamian arena. Therefore, this is, in this point I'm in total agreement with the excavators. The whole palatial structure was transformed into a kind of a ceremonial center. And we see that here in this round large room, there were plenty of fragments of sculptures found, and they probably formed part of a ceremonial center for the veneration of Arsacid kingship, or Mithridates in particular, maybe both. So, to return, the representation of the character is augmented in the entire complex by the enormous size of the buildings and their central rooms. The red building and tower buildings' general layout clearly are related to Achaemenid palaces and Eastern Iranian Central Asian architectural traditions. But peculiar are the characteristic long and small ambulatory corridors which give access to the rarely interconnected rooms. With these meaningful features, the architecture of the royal complex at Nisa demonstrates a new style of representation. It is matched by the interior design with Hellenistic-inspired architectural decoration and sculptures, as well as paintings of battling riders and clay sculptures. Via this fusion of Hellenistic influence and Central Asian workmanship, the Arsacid court at Nisa created a succinct form of royal representation. But would have Ctesiphon looked like this? Most certainly not. We have to observe the difference in date and region, and we should expect more local Mesopotamian tradition, something which could point to two things. First, we might assume that the room formation of an Iwan would have played a role in the architecture at Ctesiphon. And second, we would expect an even more Hellenistic influence. And I will briefly explain what I mean. Let's first talk about the Iwan. The best known example for an Iwan building from the Arsacid period is the so-called Parthian palace at Ashur, originally founded in the 1st century AD. It experienced remodeling several times and was partly built over, at least in the 3rd century. And the published plan here, everybody cites, and you will see hundreds of times, is definitely not the entire building. The building continues towards that direction, but it was never excavated in that area. So the peristyle as a kind of an entrance to this palace is complete nonsense. It doesn't make any sense in no architectural summary, neither in Hellenistic nor in Arsacid architecture. So something more is up here, which I also have seen when we were excavating there in 1989, but I'm sorry, there isn't any plan available, just for information. So you see 4 Liwans here at the court, and every single house in Ashur at that period does have a Liwan. There's not a single one without one. Usually they are situated in the south, and there is a second one, also one in the north. The whole idea of an Iran is created in Babylonia and Assyria in the 1st century AD or CE, or say here. And you will find it not only in Ashur, but in many, many other places. And I show you some examples from Nippur, Abu Kubur, etc., which are all dated to the 1st century CE. And you see that all these structures, minor palatial structures from the Arsacid period, share certain features in that you always have this Iwan and the main room behind it, surrounded by narrow corridors and a number of rooms, in most cases of about the same size, so we don't know whether these are storerooms or other rooms, but that doesn't, is not so important in this connection. These features are mirrored, as you can see, in quite a number of examples, and this is evidence that across a very wide area we see a uniform design for representative manor houses, some of which, particularly as at Ashur and Nippur, might have served as seats for local dignitaries or middle-level administrators. This uniformity in the architecture, featuring huge halls behind Iwans, surrounded by ambulatory corridors, points to common perceptions of structure and representation. Thus, these residences of lower-ranking officials might reflect ideas of the appearance of the royal court as well. Certainly, the correlation between the Quarterpalast at Ashur and Khosrow's palace in Ctesiphon indicated a development of these ideas. The other possibility how the palace at Ctesiphon might have looked like is indicated by our recent excavations in Charax-Spasinu, 50 kilometers north of Basra. Originally founded by Alexander, the renamed city near the confluence of the Tigris and the Karpel became not only the port and harbor city for the whole of Babylonia, including Ctesiphon and Seleucia, and also Susa, but also the capital of the Arsacid province of Messenia. And as already mentioned in the introduction by Ali, we are carrying out research there since 2016, on mainly surface survey and drone imaging, as well as geophysical research, which you can see here on that map. Over here, that part is the rampart, the still existing rampart of the town, which stretches for more than 7 square kilometers, or 2.7 square miles. An area we became particularly interested in is this area here, area C, because there drone images show a kind of a palatial structure of 100 to 100 by 110 meters. And I hope you can clearly see here these rooms which show in the soil even without excavation. Or here in that image where you can see these straight lines up here. So last campaign we did some test trenches. This is also something we will continue in the next campaign and in the second phase of our research there. But what I would like to show you is from our test trenches last year, we just focused on this peristyle structure, and immediately beneath the surface we found these columns, which looked like this. So very clearly something you would classify as Western architecture. And here we do have it for the first time, probably on a larger scale. And the only comparison we have in Mesopotamia so far is the so-called Parthian palace from Nippur, with the one major difference that the Parthian palace at Nippur is just 1/4 of the size of the building we are dealing with here. Still, we wouldn't at that point say that we are dealing with a palace, certainly not with the palace of the king of Mycenae, but with a palatial structure which gives us some idea about how the palace at Ctesiphon might have looked like. So, we do have these Hellenistic features, peristyle columns with very fine cantileters, even though under very difficult circumstances, made from bricks, and thus in a very peculiar way. What we see is a form of bricolage. And this is what I would expect in Ctesiphon too, a bricolage in architecture and in its furnishings, which might have been a combination of columns from Carax and the richly stuccoed Ashur palace facade. So, if you allow just a few minor additional remarks, I'm over time anyway. So, what I just said about architecture and its design also applies to the room design with movable objects I would expect in the palace. We should not expect what was defined by Rostovtsev as Parthian art, characterized by a strict frontality and linearity. A contrast to the more natural Greek rendering of bodies, as Rostovtsev pointed out, which is the kind of Parthian art considered typical of 80 years ago. A closer look on context reveals that the supposedly typical frontal expression is largely connected with specific religious and representational contexts, where it forces the viewer, human or divine, to engage and interact with the image. Arsacid art, or rather art everywhere in the Arsacid Empire, instead shows a multitude of contemporary different styles, which simply have not found enough reception. Thus, for the court at Ctesiphon, we should not expect stiff frontal statues like the ones in Hatra. We should rather look for examples in the seemingly Hellenized objects in bronze or marble, which permeate the material culture at Hatra, Susa, Nineveh, etc. Or we should look for the very vivid wall paintings of fight and hunt from Hatra, Nisa, and other places. Or, in the end, to include to show a last example, we could also expect something like from Kali Yaskirt, stucco panels with reliefs and figurative capitals, ornamental bands of interlocking meanders, as in Ashur, which alternate with figures provisionally interpreted as Dionysus, Aphrodite, and their founders. To conclude, much more than reliefs in a hieratic, solemn frontality appropriate in a religious context, the vividly animated protagonists at Kalayaskirt and Hatra offer us ideas of how the visual culture at Arsacid-Ctesiphon might have looked like. And with this, let me return to the Arsacid-Leia at Ctesiphon, which became the Sasanian palace at Al-Atika. Muslim authors report that like the Taki Kisra, this palace was still standing after the Muslim conquest, until in 762 the Caliph al-Mansur had his new capital Baghdad built 30 kilometers north. You might remember that this new Abbasid capital was planned as a circular city, with a calculated diameter of 2,638 meters. It was built around the royal palace, as Robert Hillenbrand wrote, like a giant nimbus of power encircling the ruler. Islamic archaeologists used to see the palace's prototype in Ardashir Hura, or Firuzabad, a perfect circle of 1950 meters in diameter. But while al-Mansur might have been aware of Ardashir Hura, which we really don't know, he certainly stayed in Al-Madain for some time in 754-55, and must have seen the still spectacular walls of the round city of Ardashir. Thus, I would strongly advocate that in 762 al-Mansur built Baghdad on the model of Ardashir, although slightly smaller. At the same time, he stripped the White Palace of Al-Atika, which is, he stripped the palace of the Arsacid and Sasanian kings of its still existing decoration for the decoration of his palace in Baghdad. So, at the same time, Al-Mansur probably when he built his new capital, Al-Mansur probably dismantled and destroyed the ancient basileia of the Arsacid king of kings. And whether we know the place or not, we probably will find very little. Thank you very much.
I think we have time for 3 questions. Questions, if you mind, for both speakers. Questions? I have a question for Dr. Tasso. Have you ever found any physical remains of those meat places in Ctesiphon, you mentioned Seleucia, were there ever workshops that you have?
No.
No, nothing.
That's so difficult to define where the exact location of mint was.
Okay.
I didn't find any indication.
All right. But some of the coins bear that.
You find the coin fine,
Yeah.
but they could be, just circulated or spread all over. But no, I haven't come across the exact indication of
Mint place. I have a question for Dr. Hosa. One of the places we can compare is Susa, actually, the remains of those residences that Gash published. I'd like to know what you think about those Parthian residences at Susa.
It's a very incomplete plan, as far as I know. And the succession what we have is neither the central part really of this palace, nor do we have the entrance situation. So what we have are some rooms on the side of this structure, as far as I can understand this. And I think it might have some resemblance to what we found in Carax, actually. But in Carax, our structure is very interesting in that it very often has these these rooms in very large scale with columns at the entrances of all these rooms, and so even more than in Susa, the example we're excavating there looks in a way very Western, although it combines Western elements in a very peculiar way. So Susa is an example I didn't quote, but basically because I'm not so sure how to employ it in this context.
Thank you. Any question? Yes.
Out of curiosity and for some other reason, I mean, do you have any idea where the city of the Antioch was situated? I mean, Procopius tells us that it was located somewhere close to Ctesiphon, but and with, according to him and to Arabic sources, with features of a Roman city, even a circus, etc. Have you any idea where to look for that?
Would you like? Matthew, I think in all kind of way that it might be here, but in contrast to most plans you see that I put in a question mark here. So there's a large, there's a large ruin field up there, and since we are looking for a place to where Antioch might have been, this would fit the huge ruins which are located there. But it's basically because all the other ruins are already named.
I see.
This is the one part we can assign to the Antioch.
And but there are no distinct Roman architectural features to be found.
There has never been any archaeological
I see.
research on that.
More questions? So, please enjoy the coffee break. We'll resume after 15 minutes. Thank you.